Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. 8 days after they fired me. The guy they hired to replace 11 years of my work, an enterprise solutions engineer whose actual experience was WordPress sites and Office 365 configurations, tried to access the admin panel of our analytics server. He didn't understand the custom authentication system I'd built. He ran some generic credential reset, and it corrupted the authentication tables for the entire client-facing portal. 87 active accounts lost access instantly. The portal stayed down for 14 days, and then my phone started ringing. The first call was Dave Ostrowski at Buckeye Freight, a $347,000 a year client. He said, "Marcus, if you hung out your own shingle, I'd move our contract. No question about it." By late May, 11 of my former employer's 17 enterprise clients had signed with my new company. $3.7 million in annual recurring revenue. And honestly, I'm still not sure how I feel about it. But let me start from the beginning. Quick thing before we dive in: if stories like this hook you, smash that like button and subscribe. We drop new ones every single day. I'm posting this from a throwaway because some of this involves active contracts, and my lawyer specifically told me not to write about it online. But it's been 10 months now, the dust has settled, and I need to get this off my chest because it's been keeping me up at night in ways I really didn't see coming. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that for 11 years, from June 2014 to March 2025, I was the analytics modeling architect at a company I'll call Ridgeline Solutions. Mid-sized consulting firm out of Columbus, Ohio. About 60 employees when I started, 91 when I left. We did B2B logistics optimization, basically building predictive routing models and cost analysis frameworks that saved our clients anywhere from 8 to 23% on annual shipping spend. Not glamorous stuff, but our clients paid between $145,000 and $580,000 a year for access to our proprietary analytics portal, so somebody thought it mattered. I built that portal, not every line of code. We had a front-end contractor for the first 2 years, but the modeling engine, the database architecture, the 14 API integrations with carrier systems, the automated reporting that generated the analyses our sales team lived and died by, I built the core of it starting in 2015, and after the contractor left in 2017, I maintained all of it alone. By 2018, I was the only person who understood how the predictive models were calibrated, how the carrier data pipelines worked, or why the cost normalization algorithm had 47 special cases for LTL freight. And here's the thing about being the solo technical person at a company where nobody else really gets what you do. When you build something complex from scratch, when you're the only person who touches the models and the infrastructure, you basically become the institutional knowledge. There's no documentation because every time I started writing it, a client emergency pulled me away, and the CEO, Gerald Forsyth, would tell me documentation was a nice-to-have, not a priority. There's no second pair of eyes because I requested a junior developer 9 times over 11 years and got turned down every single time. I kept a spreadsheet. 9 rows, 9 denials. The reasons ranged from not in the budget to let's revisit next quarter to my personal favorite, you seem to have it handled. I missed a lot of things because I seemed to have it handled. I missed my daughter's first steps because of a server migration. I worked through Thanksgiving 3 years running because Q4 was when clients needed their annual projections recalibrated. I once drove to the office at 2 a.m. during an ice storm. I remember my tires were basically skating on Sawmill Road because a client's freight routing export was stuck and their Singapore team needed it for a board presentation at 8 a.m. local time. I didn't do those things because I was a martyr. I did them because I cared about the work and nobody else could do it. And Gerald counted on both of those facts. So on Tuesday, March 11th, 2025, actually, I think it might have been a Wednesday. No, Tuesday. I remember because my wife had a dentist appointment that afternoon and I was supposed to pick up our daughter. Anyway, Gerald called me into his corner office at 4:47 p.m. 13 minutes before end of day, which felt deliberate. His HR person, Diana, was sitting in the chair by the window holding a manila folder, and she wouldn't look at me. They were eliminating my position. Restructuring, Gerald said. The company was moving to a managed services model for its technology infrastructure. He'd signed a contract with a firm called Vertex Digital Solutions out of Chicago. They would handle everything: the portal, the servers, the client integrations. More scalable, more professional. Gerald actually said enterprise grade 3 times in about 2 minutes, which told me exactly who'd been doing the selling. I asked who at Vertex would be handling the transition. Gerald said their team would be on site the following week. He described them as specialists in exactly this kind of migration. I offered right there in that meeting to do a proper handoff. I said I'd need at least 4 to 6 weeks to walk through the system architecture, transfer credentials, document the model calibrations, explain the 47 LTL edge cases, and the custom authentication system I'd built in 2017 when the off-the-shelf options couldn't handle our carrier API requirements. Diana made a note of it. Gerald said that wouldn't be necessary. Vertex had assured him they could be fully operational within 2 weeks. They'd done this sort of migration hundreds of times. They escorted me out that evening with a banker's box and 6 weeks of severance. $10,096, 15 before taxes. I remember the exact number because I stared at the paperwork in my car in the parking lot for probably 20 minutes. 11 years. A cardboard box and my Kia Sorento in the parking lot of a company I'd basically kept running. Vertex's team arrived Monday, March 17th. 3 people. I'll admit I looked them all up on LinkedIn that night, which probably wasn't healthy, but whatever. The project lead was a woman named Shannon who had spent the previous 4 years managing website redesigns for dental practices and a regional chain of dog grooming salons. I'm sure she was fine at that. That's just not logistics analytics infrastructure. The technical person was a guy named Kyle, mid-20s. His title at Vertex was Enterprise Solutions Engineer. But from what I could piece together later, his actual hands-on experience was mostly WordPress sites, Office 365 tenant configurations, and basic AWS setups. They were supposed to have this handled in 2 weeks. And that brings us to the moment I told you about at the start. Kyle crashed the client portal on Wednesday, March 19th, day 3. My friend Priya in accounting, Priya and I had been work friends for years. She'd text me updates even though she probably shouldn't have filled me in on the details. Fair enough, the authentication architecture was unusual. I'd built a custom token-based system in 2017 when the standard OAuth implementations couldn't handle the way our carrier API integrations needed to pass credentials across 14 different freight networks simultaneously. It worked well, but it was bespoke, and the logic wasn't obvious if you didn't know it was there. Not the underlying data, the data was fine, sitting intact on the backup drives. But the entire login and permissions layer, the thing that let clients actually see what they were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for, was gone. During those 14 days, Shannon from Vertex kept telling Gerald it would be fixed by end of week. 3 consecutive Fridays, 3 consecutive failures. Gerald was apparently trying to reach me during this time. Priya told me he was calling my old work extension, which had been disconnected when they terminated my account. He didn't have my personal cell number. In 11 years, he'd never once asked for it. Think about that. On March 21st, 2 days into the outage, Dave Ostrowski at Buckeye Freight called. Dave and I had worked together since 2016. He'd become something more than just a client contact over the years. We'd grab lunch when he was in Columbus. He came to my daughter's 2nd birthday party. He said his operations team couldn't access any of their routing models. They were doing manual carrier selection for the first time in 6 years. It was costing them real money every single day. I told him the truth. I'd been let go. I didn't have access to fix anything. And that's when he made me the offer that changed everything, the one I already told you about. Now here's where I need to be honest about something, because the version of this story where I'm some blameless victim who never had a dark thought isn't the real version. My first instinct when Dave said that wasn't gratitude or even surprise. It was satisfaction. Like this sick, warm feeling of vindication that honestly kind of alarmed me because it meant some part of me had been waiting for this. Waiting for Gerald to realize what he'd thrown away. Wanting him to feel it. And I didn't love finding that out about myself. I sat on Dave's offer for 4 days. I talked to my wife about it every night. We'd put our daughter to bed and then sit at the kitchen table going back and forth until midnight. I talked to my therapist about it. She asked me why I was hesitating, and I said because I don't want to be the kind of person who profits from someone else's failure. She said, "Whose failure is it?" And I mean, she had a point. But it didn't make the knot in my stomach go away. It still hasn't, if I'm being honest. I called my lawyer on March 25th. She reviewed my employment agreement and found something I'd genuinely forgotten about. When Gerald hired me back in 2014, I was bringing over 3 clients from my previous firm. He wanted those relationships, so he agreed to a client relationship clause, Section 14(3), paragraph B, that stated any client relationships I personally developed and maintained were considered professional relationships that survived termination of employment. My lawyer confirmed it was enforceable. She also confirmed that Ridgeline's non-compete was written so broadly that under Ohio's recent enforceability reforms, it was essentially void. I filed my LLC on March 28, 2025. Apex Analytics Solutions. Registered in Ohio, operating agreement done, EIN obtained, business bank account opened at Huntington, all within 48 hours. And I still felt sick about it. I remember sitting in the Huntington branch on Polaris Parkway, signing the signature card for the business account, and my hand was shaking. Not from excitement. I just kept thinking, once I sign this, that's it. There's no pretending I'm not doing what I'm doing. I did not call a single client. I want to be clear about that. But I also didn't ignore my phone when it rang, and I knew exactly what would happen when those calls came. So was I truly passive in this? I've gone back and forth on that question for months, and I still don't have a clean answer. Buckeye Freight signed first, then Meridian Logistics on April 1st, then 3 more over the following 2 weeks. But here's the thing that actually kept me up at night during all of this. Not everyone affected by the portal outage was a decision maker who could just move their contract to a new vendor. There were operations people at those client companies, dispatchers, logistics coordinators, people making $38,000 or $42,000 a year, who suddenly couldn't do their jobs because the system they depended on went dark. A woman named Carla at one of the smaller client firms called me in tears because her manager was threatening to write her up over missed shipment deadlines that were entirely caused by the outage. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with her, walking her through how to pull usable data from cached reports on her laptop. And I felt genuinely terrible. Not because of anything I did, but because I'd built a system that a lot of ordinary people depended on for their livelihoods, and it went down, and there was nothing I could do about it because Gerald Forsyth decided a transition plan wasn't necessary. I thought about offering to consult, to just fix the authentication system myself and bill Ridgeline for it. My wife thought I should. My therapist thought I should at least consider it. But my lawyer pointed out that doing so could complicate the client relationship clause and potentially give Gerald grounds to argue I was still functionally employed by Ridgeline. So I didn't, and I'm still not sure that was the right call. The legal logic made sense on paper, but Carla crying on the phone wasn't a legal problem. Meanwhile, Vertex had finally admitted they needed to bring in a specialist database firm to rebuild the authentication system and quoted Gerald $215,000 for the work. Gerald refused to pay. Priya told me he said something to the effect of "That's more than Marcus made in 2.5 years, this is insane." Yeah. Read that again. He said the quiet part out loud and didn't even realize it. That's how much he was paying me to keep a $3.7 million revenue engine running. And he thought the $215K quote was the insane part. By late May, I had signed 11 clients. 11 of Ridgeline's 17 enterprise accounts had terminated their contracts, exercised their 30-day out clauses, and signed with Apex Analytics. $3.7 million in annual contract value. I priced everything about 8% below what they'd been paying Ridgeline, partly as a thank you and partly because my overhead was me, a Costco folding table, and a refurbished Dell server in my basement in Gahanna, Ohio. Gerald sent me a cease and desist letter in early May. My lawyer responded with a copy of Section 14(3), paragraph B, and a 4-page letter that took apart every single claim. We heard nothing back. I hired Priya in June. She was my first employee. Then 2 developers in July. We moved into an office on Polaris Parkway in August. 1,200 square feet. Nothing fancy, but it had actual desks instead of folding tables and a small kitchen where Priya immediately set up a coffee station that she's weirdly protective of. Like, don't touch her pour-over setup. Just don't. Now I want to tell you that Ridgeline collapsed completely. That Gerald lost everything. And I'd be lying if I said some petty part of me doesn't wish that were true. But that's not what happened. Ridgeline is still operating. They're down to about 63 employees, which is roughly where they were when I started 11 years ago. They kept 6 enterprise clients and picked up a few smaller accounts over the summer and fall. Gerald finally hired a real development team, 3 engineers, and they rebuilt the portal from scratch. Vertex's contract was terminated in April after the 14-day outage. From what I hear through the grapevine, the new portal is decent. Not as sophisticated as what I built. They apparently dropped the predictive modeling entirely and just do standard reporting now, but it works. Gerald also brought on his nephew at some point, a kid named Tyler, in some kind of business development coordinator role. He lasted about 3 months. I only mention this because when I first heard about it, I assumed the entire outsourcing decision had been a cover to bring in family. But I don't actually know if that's true. It might have been coincidence, or Tyler might have been hired to fill a different gap. People want these stories to have clean villains with clear, simple motives, and Gerald made plenty of real, documented mistakes without me needing to invent motives I can't verify. Apex Analytics has 22 employees now. We did $3.4 million in revenue in our first partial year, which is less than the total contract value of the clients who moved over because we spent the first few months rebuilding infrastructure rather than billing at full rate. We have 16 clients total. 5 of those are referrals from the original 11. I pay my junior developers $75,000 to start. I have a full staging environment and a documentation system that borders on obsessive because I know exactly what happens when you don't have one. Nobody works holidays unless they genuinely want to, and if they do, they get triple time and a handwritten thank you note from me. My daughter is 4 now. I built her a swing set with the first real paycheck from Apex. One of those big cedar ones from Lowe's, the backyard discovery brand, if anyone's wondering. Took me a full weekend and I had parts left over, which is apparently normal. She watched from the back porch, asking me every 10 minutes if it was done yet. I don't miss her stuff anymore. That part of this isn't complicated. That part I'm just grateful for. But here's what I keep coming back to, and the reason I'm writing this 10 months later instead of 2 weeks later when I was still running on adrenaline. There are roughly 30 people who used to work at Ridgeline who lost their jobs because the company shrank. Some of them were people I'd worked alongside for years. Good people who had nothing to do with Gerald's decisions. They didn't fire me. They didn't outsource the infrastructure to a team that wasn't qualified. They didn't refuse to fund documentation or a second developer. They just worked there. And while I didn't cause the decisions that shrank Ridgeline, Gerald did that entirely on his own. I can't pretend that my existence as a direct competitor didn't speed it up. Those 30 people, I think about them a lot. I don't have a clean moral for this story. I really thought I would by now. My therapist says I'm processing guilt that isn't mine to carry, and I know she's probably right. But knowing something intellectually and actually feeling it are 2 completely different things. What I know for certain is this. I built those systems. I maintained those client relationships through a decade of late nights, early mornings, ice storms, missed holidays, and moments with my daughter I'll never get back. I earned whatever loyalty those clients chose to give me. And all Gerald had to do, all he ever had to do, was approve a junior developer. Or budget a documentation sprint into the quarterly plan. Or not hand the keys to his entire revenue engine to a team whose lead had been redesigning websites for dog groomers 6 months earlier. Or at the bare minimum, let me do the transition I offered to do for free. But he didn't. And now we're both living with what happened. He lost the revenue. I've got the kind of thing that sits in your chest at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep and you're just staring at the ceiling fan going around. So here's my question for you. If you spent 11 years building something with your own hands and the person who benefited most from your work decided you were replaceable, would you have done what I did? Would you have answered those calls? Or would you have let it go and started fresh somewhere else? Some days I honestly don't know which answer I'd give if I could do it over. Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every single one.